Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I am so excited to bring you this week's episode. On the show today, I have one of my first yoga teachers, someone who I started practicing asana with. I did a little bit of my teacher training with, and who's had a huge impact from a distance on a lot of the yoga that I am practicing today. I have Pradeep Sattwamaya on the show today, and we're going to be talking about all things Surya Namaskar. And we're tracing its origins and we're really getting into sun salutations. Now, before I tell you more about today's episode, I want to quickly remind you that my pranayama immersive study program and optional teacher training is starting this January. It begins on January 9th. It is completely online. It runs for 6 weeks. You can also do the entire thing on replay. Enrollments have started a couple of weeks ago, and we will be closing the early bird pricing on December 31st. So make sure you check those details out. If pranayama is something you're interested in and you're looking to learn it in a very concise, structured, and effective way, where you can start practicing it for yourself. And if you are teaching and you want to bring this into your classes, then you have a structured approach into that as well. On January 4th, I will be offering an information session. The link to sign up for that is available in the show notes. It's also there on my Instagram handle and anywhere else you connect with me. So make sure you get waitlisted for the information session, but know that the pranayama course, which you've heard me talk about before. You've heard the pranayama episodes on this podcast. If you haven't, just make sure you go and look back. We've done a whole lot of conversations about pranayama, and I've told you my own reason why I teach it in a certain way. So that's coming up on Jan 9th, which is literally 2.5 weeks away from the drop of this episode. So go to the link in my show notes to know more. I will see you in the information session on January 4th. The course starts on January 9th. Early bird pricing runs out on December 31st. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me, and we can talk all things pranayama and get your doubts clarified there. Okay. Now, let's put all of that aside. I want to put your attention on today's episode. Okay. We have Pradeep, who has been doing yoga since he was 7 years old. He started learning yoga from his father, just with a simple few poses. And after he completed his engineering degree, he devoted himself to a full-time study of yoga. And he has a master's in applied yogic sciences from one of the world's first yoga universities. It's the Bihar Yoga Bharati, which is located in Munger in India. And he graduated with a university gold medal. He's taught across the world, right from India to Europe to Southeast Asia, and he's been teaching and mentoring many yoga students and yoga teachers, and a lot of teachers I know are deeply are influenced by him. Okay, we've trained with him, we're influenced by him, we look up to him for wisdom and knowledge. And what I enjoy about Pradeep is not only is he just a very simple, humble person, he embodies a lot of the yoga and he makes it very relatable. So he can take all these complex aspects of yoga and simplify them and make them very relatable, which is why I asked him if he'd talk about classical Surya Namaskar, because it is such a simple yet daunting topic for a lot of yoga teachers. And we as modern practitioners, we know it from the lens of it being very physical. So we get into the origins of it. And what I enjoy in this podcast is Pradeep actually has a little slideshow where he shows us photographs and pictures, not photographs, but pictures when we trace the history and the origins of yoga. So I would highly recommend that if you're listening to this, listen to it, but also go on our YouTube channel and watch the presentation part of it. Okay, because that'll really give you clarity when he talks about the history and evolution of the sun salutations. Today, Pradeep is the global head of yoga at Shwasa. He is currently pursuing his deeper studies in yoga texts, Ayurveda, and modern neuroscience. Pradeep used to own a very successful chain of yoga studios in Bangalore. In fact, I used to work at one of his studios before I moved here, and that got bought over by another fitness brand. And he currently is continuing to work at Shwasa. And I hope to have more of him on our show and our podcast in future because he has so much to share. I really hope you enjoy this episode. If you have any questions or you want to learn more about Pradeep's work and Shwasa in general, then please head to our show notes at letstalk.yoga/listen. And you can find all the links to reach to Pradeep and his work at letstalk.yoga/listen. Here's today's episode. Hi, Pradeep. Welcome to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast.
Hi, Arundhati. Good to see you after a while.
I know it's been a while. For the listeners, what most of them don't know is you were one of my first yoga teachers. When I started, I remember one of my first few asana classes was with you, and then the teacher training. I mean, I'm talking 2011, 12?
12, yeah.
Somewhere there, yes. And since the podcast is 3 years old, and I have been wanting to get you on it for the past 3 years. So I am very glad that you are here today.
I'm glad too. Thanks for inviting me. Would like to talk to you and your audience, people who've been practicing with you. I'm glad I'm here.
I'm glad you're here too. So let's jump in. Today we'll be talking about Surya Namaskar, sun salutations, right? So, and there are, because I've learned this from you many years ago, there are different types of Surya Namaskars. There is what I know as the classical Surya Namaskar that we used to do a lot in India. And then there is the new Western set of Western Surya Namaskars. So I want to be able to have a little more clarity generally about the practice of Surya Namaskar because I feel it's oversimplified in modern day.
Okay.
So where should we start? Should we begin with how old is this practice?
Well, I would say Surya Namaskar is probably some of the new practices in the modern day asana practice. The set of asanas that we have. So Surya Namaskar would qualify as a new practice. And this, if you look back at the literature that we have and the history of yoga in its various forms, it's a pretty new practice, I would say, comparatively new.
So when somebody says classical Surya Namaskar is thousands of years old, you're saying that's not really accurate?
Well, we'll have to get a little deeper into the purpose of the practice and in how that will fit into yoga. So obviously understanding what is yoga is definitely something that is useful. And how you would anyway investigate such questions is going into the existing literature that has come to us and maybe look into it and figure out if there is any mention or any kind of indication towards such practices. If you look at the Yoga Sutras, obviously we don't find any names of asanas, but the commentaries do call out some names of asanas. And as many of us yoga teachers or students know, a lot of these asanas are mostly the meditative asanas. You have the Padmasanas, you have the Swastika and Simha, and in Hatha we also have Siddhasana. So a lot of the asana per se, the meaning of course of asana is to sit. And so the intent of asana in classical yoga is to prepare your body in a comfortable, stable position to begin your inward journey or the Antaranga Yoga, the meditations as we generalize it now. And so that's the purpose. So obviously asana had a limited meaning. And I think additionally in the Yoga Sutras, we also find references to, in the commentaries, we find reference to some relaxation asanas, like resting like an elephant, resting like a camel. These kinds of relaxation is also mentioned. So probably those are the two major categories. You have the meditative asanas and then you have the resting asanas. Apart from that, everything that we know of as asanas, the whole pool of asanas is coming from the much later Hatha texts. It's coming from the texts like Hatha Pradeep and various other yoga Upanishads. There's a lot of yoga Upanishads which do mention, call out the names of asanas. One thing is very consistent across classical yoga and also the Hatha yogas. That's the meditative asanas. They are consistent. There's no debate and there's no argument over whether this is an asana, whether someone has to do this or not. But when it comes to practices like Surya Namaskara, and for that matter, a lot of the standing practices, quite a few of the inversions that we know of, arm balances that we do quite a lot in the modern day, these don't find a mention in these classical texts and commentaries. And so, Surya Namaskara has no mention, as the word Surya Namaskara itself isn't mentioned. And if you also look at the purpose, the meaning of Surya Namaskara, a certain kind of reverence to the sun, and a heavenly body, or a very important energy source for us on this planet and the material world itself. And if you look at yoga, yoga is about a certain freedom from the material uncertainty. So obviously, sun and the heavenly bodies, the moon, and all of these are influential. There is this worldly energy that influences us. We need to acknowledge, we need to work with it, align ourselves with it. That's important. But ultimately, if you look at what is the goal of yoga, is liberation. I mean, ideally, you're looking at not being born in this ecosystem again, where you have the sun, you have the moon, you have the stars, you have gravity, and all these. And so, sun salutation, as we call it in English, Surya Namaskara itself, don't find a mention in the yogic scriptures, most of the yogic scriptures. But parallelly, maybe other systems of worship and other things does. Elemental worship has always been a part of, our Indian, you could say, culture or Indian subcontinent. The practice that we have here. No doubt there has been various forms of sun worship or reverence also, not necessarily worship, but I think reverence, acknowledging it and getting to align ourselves with it, or knowing the influence of the energy of the sun on us as humans, not just bodies, but also the mind, has always been around. It's, there's no debate around that. I think cultures across the world acknowledge what they could see, right, in the sky, up there. The sun, the moon, the stars, they've always been a part of almost all cultures across. So no difference here in India as well. I think we do have quite a significant also body of knowledge, about the sun, in say astronomy, we do understand the Earth's spin around its own axis, and then its movement around the sun, and all of these information is already there. So which simply means that they started out looking out at the sun and saying, okay, this energy of the sun is what sustains life on this earth. So it's important for that we understand. So obviously there is that importance for reverence to sun always there. And so various other practices do exist. Sandhya Vandane, morning, puja ritual, Vedic ritual, where you, do this Sandhya Vandana, once in the morning, once in the evening. That's all there. All of those are there. But would you call that a yoga practice? Is something that we can always debate about. Okay, can we include that as a yoga practice? Debatable. Just like we have included a lot of mantras in the yogic practices, that's also debatable. Originally, was it a yoga practice, or are we including that because it has innumerable benefits? Is always a different topic that we can talk about. So similarly here, Surya Namaskara, the word itself, I haven't found it anywhere in my study of the Yoga Sutras, the Yoga Upanishads, or the Hatha textbooks. But the origins of this practice itself could be ancient. Of course, it is ancient. It's not like there's a doubt about it. Now that, a lot of our present need is to start from the physical aspect of yoga. And so this importance of Surya Namaskara is no doubt what we see in our everyday class, right? The first thing that we do is Surya Namaskara. the first part of the section of the class, or the first practices anybody learns, as a beginner, is Surya Namaskara. And so we cannot deny the importance and its present day relevance to our practice. But its origins can be traced to other practices, definitely. And in the modern day, we have accepted a lot of other complementing or supporting elements into yoga as we practice in the modern day. And so Surya Namaskara could be one such inclusion into our practice. So to answer your question, is Surya Namaskara an ancient yoga practice? Maybe not. Okay. But is Surya Namaskara itself an ancient practice? Oh, yes. There are practices, different forms of sun worship or reverence to sun. And one form could have been the physical form of this. But more importantly, because this is to do with the physical energy, the sun, the solar energy, and there are certain activities that we do in our everyday life needs this energy. Right? When we are, say, when you are working in the material world, you need the solar energy. When you're intellectually working, you need the influence of the moon, the lunar energy. This is probably a simplistic understanding we have, and probably valid too. And so we all know that energy is coming from the sun. So any activity that requires energy, physical energy, and energy to spend in the outside, there is the sun that comes into the picture. Worship of sun or channeling the energy of the sun that comes into the picture. So a lot of other activities have used this very well. Yoga is an internalizing practice. You go within. So largely to do with the moon, and of course the moon's energy, you could always debate that it's a reflection of the sun, but nevertheless it changes. So practices like physical practices like warfare and training for warfare or physical fitness, all of these definitely look towards harnessing the energy of the sun. And since in the modern day we also are looking at the physical part of our requirement, so obviously it is a very no-brainer inclusion into our modern day practice. So am I making sense so far?
You're totally making sense. I want to pick on a few things that you mentioned.
Go ahead.
There are three things that really jumped at me. One is you said in the ancient scriptures and the texts, we have the meditation and dhyana, and everything is towards that. Right. And then later on, or relaxation ones. In some scriptures and books, we also have the relaxation asanas. And you'll see the meditation and the relaxation. But in my head, Surya Namaskar is a very active practice. It's almost contrary to that meditation and relaxation, though. Is it a moving meditation is a question I will save for later. So that's one aspect, just that compared to what was in the ancient books, this is a much more active practice. I don't really think there's a question there, but just that stood out to me.
Yeah, so probably I'll also maybe clarify a little more. So what I was referring to was the classical yoga sutras.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and so we haven't talked about Hatha yoga.
Okay.
Hatha, when you come to Hatha, there is this interplay of energies, right?
That's where I want to go next.
Solar and that's a Hatha. Maybe you could talk about Hatha yoga. How it is important. There are practices in Hatha yoga that stimulate the solar energy in the body, and kind of seeking a balance between the solar and lunar energy in the body. And probably that's where we have picked it up in the modern day. But even in the Hatha texts, we don't find a mention of Surya Namaskar kind of practice. We don't find a mention of it. Even though asana list is now expanding from what we saw in the Yoga Sutras. Now we have practices, asanas, that are largely meditative. We cannot, skip that. Even if it comes to Hatha Yoga, there are the most important practices are meditative asanas. Most Hatha books talk about that. And then the other asanas that are listed in the Hatha text could be classified into, one is some asanas that might improve your health, that gives you health. So again, these are not the primary objective of asanas in Hatha Yoga, but they say incidentally there are these set of asanas that also will keep you healthy. Okay, that promote health. So there is one section of asana in the Hatha Yoga that helps promote health, and they do talk about kindling the Agni in the abdominal. Yes, Jatra Agni. So I think that there is the influence of Ayurvedic principles also here in Hatha text, that they talk about. When they talk about health, right, they're not really getting deep into various physiological functions and the healing process and all of that. Actually, it's a very intelligent approach as well. And all you have to do is to manage your Agni, Jatra Agni, the abdominal fire, and that one is responsible for a lot of the physiological functions, for a lot of the transformation that happens in the body. And so it's a very smart move, I would say. And obviously, Ayurveda recognizes this and also follows this. And if you look at many of the Ayurvedic approaches, it starts with kindling the Agni. And so that is how far the Hatha Yogis go. They don't go deeper into Ayurveda and, understand the physiology or want to make it a part of the practice. But what they do understand, and rightly so, is that, okay, if we do some physical activity or otherwise breath activity that can kindle the fire, I think we could claim that a lot of the health benefits could be drawn from this. And that's what they claim in some of the asanas. You will see very clearly. And if you look at what are some of the examples, to give you some example, Paschimottana, Ardha Matsyendra. Now, if you, as yoga teachers and practitioners, if you visualize and experience of what you do in Paschima, in Ardha Matsyendra, Mayura, all of this, you see, okay, you're doing something around this navel region, the abdominal region. And so kindling of the fire is definitely the approach the Hatha Yogis are taking there. That's one set of asanas, the second set of asanas. But then the other major set of asanas also comes from austerity practices. Austerity meaning where you try to push the limits of your body, of your mind, and say doing headstand, being in headstand, Shirasasana for long. It's not just doing for one. It's still within our limit, but we are pushing from our comfort zone. So these are called austerity practices. So standing on one leg. Vrikshasana is a very common yoga asana, right? And so that also comes from kind of an austerity practice that Hatha Yogis brought in. Hatha Yogis also practice quite a bit around physical fire. If you look at their practice, you can also find that when you go to Kumbh Mela. There is the physical fire, Agni, and then practices are done around it, and for so the fire itself, the sun energy itself is been prominent, but we are now slowly differentiating the list of asanas in Hatha Yoga, or for that matter, classical yoga, and not directly talking about Surya Namaskar. They don't really mention Surya Namaskar. But similar kind of practices are there, so which is how we can tell that we can, Surya Namaskar seems to be, yoga practice.
So, I mean, the origins of it for me are a mystery, and hence this topic. And I've heard some yoga teachers say that it's not a part of yoga, which is why I was wondering about the origins. But you spoke about the two energies, right? The solar and the lunar. So while we have a Surya Namaskar, we also have a Chandra Namaskar, correct? Can you talk a little bit about, yes, Surya Namaskar is in the morning and it is with the rising sun. But what about this, if I may say so, slightly ignored Chandra Namaskar, at least ignored out here, okay? Chandra Namaskar. Are there any differences between, I'm assuming there are some differences between the two. And you said solar is for just all the activities we want to do. Lunar is for a little more of our contemplative, intellectual type of work. So, and I'm understanding this as her and her, the two opposing energies that we work with in Hatha Yoga. So, can you shed a little bit of light on the Surya Namaskar?
Sure.
Chandra Namaskar.
Chandra Namaskar. Okay. I think, you can put Surya Namaskar like we are now slowly categorizing Surya Namaskar as not an authentic yoga practice and maybe a fantastic inclusion, though, smart inclusion, and that benefiting a lot of us. I think we would also put Chandra Namaskar under the same bucket. So obviously, when you talk about Surya, then obviously you would have thought about, okay, there must be, or we could do something like Chandra Namaskar and just bring it in. The point is, they don't find a mention in any of these yoga texts, and so it's which is why it is debatable, or we don't have evidence as of now. We could say that that it is a yoga practice, that yogis practice this, and so that is debatable. We don't have. And so I think when we clarify where Surya Namaskara comes from, I think we could also consider Chandra Namaskara and under the same category. And the other thing you asked was, is there a difference in these two? Obviously, I think the approach and energy you expend during the practice, even though Chandra, moon, mental, it should be a mental practice, but then this is physical. It's in many schools it is similar to Surya Namaskara. Maybe a couple of asanas change. So you're still using the physical body. And then you are probably changing the approach to the practice. Probably you are also changing the breath that you emphasize on in the practice and creating kind of a subtle introverted energy. I think at least at the end of the practice, like what you said, moving meditation probably applies better for Chandra Namaskara because, you're going inwards as you do the practice. But Surya Namaskara keeps you outwardly. I mean, of course, most of the time, your body is, you can experience the flow of energy in the body. You can experience sweating. You can experience exertion. And so all of that keeps you outwardly oriented. And so, to answer your question, I think there is an approach. There are schools that practice it. It's a different approach, similar kind of asana, but a slightly different approach. Internally, what you put forth is different.
So can I ask you a simplistic question there? So if it's morning and it's Surya Namaskar, am I, and I might be generalizing too much, so tell me if I am I looking at like a bigger inhalation, a stronger, trying to get that type of heat going? Evening, am I moving slower? Am I focusing more on exhalation? Is that type of a approach to seeing this valid or?
It's actually very interesting, right? When we think of yoga asana practice, we cannot think of it without breath.
Yes.
But interestingly, breath is also not mentioned in any of the asana sections of be it Hatha Yoga or forget about Yoga Sutra, just 3 verses on asanas. No mention of breath. Maybe we infer breath. Infer that, okay, breath should be a part of it. And then we are only inferring, which means there's no information as to how you will breathe. Will you breathe longer, shorter? And probably the breath science itself is different. There are other sciences which work on breath. I think Siddha Yoga, I think that's they do investigate much deeper into breath and they talk about. And there's also one other stream, Swara Yoga, that's also deeper into the Swara, the channels of breath. And so there are these other parallel streams which do investigate the breath and do employ breath differently for different purposes. But in the classical sense, we look at just the Hatha practices, breath is not even mentioned in all of the asanas, multiple meditative asana. We said there are asanas for health, kindling the fire. And the other buckets would be asanas to prepare for the sitting posture and all of this. Anyway, none of these asanas do talk about you inhale and then you go into the practice, or you inhale slowly or deeply and then get into the practice. That kind of, details are not available. It could be, but I think it was more of a default. It could be default information. When you say move your body, it meant that you move with the coordination of breath, but it's not spelled out.
Fair.
And in the modern day, obviously, if you see what of the yoga practices has caught our attention, it's largely the asana and to a secondary extent, breath practices, because both are physical in nature, breath
they're
also
tangible
to an extent,
in many ways.
Yes, which is why they've become so popular. And probably people have also gone slightly deeper into it. That's how we've come with a whole lot of new asanas, a whole lot of alignments to it, a whole lot of variations, a whole lot of exercises with breath, simply because these two caught our attention, or probably at our level of consciousness, it's easy to connect to these two. And obviously, as I spend more time with asana and the breath practices, I would come up with nuances of the practice. Maybe someone who's been practicing for long could figure out, okay, there could be this classification. Okay, there could be this method. Okay, there could be this differentiation. So body and breath, to a large extent, what we have, the present day classification is all modern day. If you go to classical yoga, it's simply about preparing to sit down, to meditate.
So you're saying the end goal has shifted in some way?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, the yogis still go a certain way, but the modern day practitioner is there for physical health and wellness.
Yes. True. I think this also probably brings us back to Surya Namaskara. If you would like to look at a short slide as to origins. Where does this modern day Surya Namaskara come from? Maybe just my study of it, and I'm just putting this together. A couple of slides. Is that okay? Can I
It
share
is okay.
that?
I want to ask you one question before we go to the slides, and feel free to answer it after your slides are over. At one point, you mentioned earlier in our conversation that a lot of supplemental elements have come into yoga.
Yes.
What are you referring to?
See, in the physical practice, a lot of the other physical forms, sciences have come into yoga, like wrestling for that matter, warfare for that matter, martial arts, gymnastics. I mean, in India, of course, gymnastic also could be, it was more of folk art. But I think even
I'm
that
saying
was,
gymnastics as a very non-Western way of saying it.
Correct. But yes, in the modern day, there has been that influence on that. How about Kalaripayattu and the martial arts? So a lot of the traditional exercises have contributed to the modern day. Asana part of it, of course. The asana part, it goes well. And on the other hand, there's also a contribution from, say, a lot of other things like Ayurveda. Ayurveda has contributed, at least the way we now look at yoga is in combination with Ayurveda. We don't look at it independently. So that's one other science that has come into it. And probably also a lot of the, study of philosophies. Apart from Sankhya and yoga, now many students, or many styles of yoga for that matter, are influenced by Vedanta philosophy. So we are bringing in Vedanta philosophy also into the yoga practice. And obviously many other philosophy, maybe, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, also to some extent. The darshanas come in, right? But originally, yoga, Sankhya and yoga is what is required for the practice and study of yoga. And so there has been that. And I think probably there are a lot of other small things that might have come in into the practice. So it's been evolving, all along. And because our modern day need is more of health, I think Ayurveda and to a large extent modern medical science has also come into the way we understand the practice, the way we do the practice.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. Please go ahead with your slides.
Okay. Very quickly, just a few slides. We'll start with, the origins. Where could this come from? Okay, it's a fantastic practice. Seems like, has elements of yoga where you have breath with it. You have, also mantras and other things that are coming into the practice. Largely, in my study, I could trace a certain part of Surya Namaskara to Malla Yuddha or Malla training. Mallas are the wrestlers, the ancient wrestling culture in India, is Mallas. And you will find them very often in both Ramayana and Mahabharata. And so very clearly, of course, if you want to know, Hanuman was a Malla, Vali, Sugriva, they had a, duet. And then Sri Krishna, in the Mahabharata, we've all grown up listening to the story of how Sri Krishna beats his uncle at Malla Yuddha. Balarama, his brother, Bhima, all of these, these are Mallas. Mallas is a wrestling, modern, probably different rules, probably different techniques even, but I think that's where it comes from. And if you look at mallas, wrestling as such, even for that matter, if you look at how the sport is being played, you need, of course, the whole body agility. It's not just one part of body. But what plays a very important role for the mallas is the upper body strength. Lower body stability, upper body strength is very important. Here are some material evidences from temples and other from India. I think you could find more. I just wanted to bring up a couple of slides. You could see them here, training in an akhara, not a sand pit. It's usually red soil, nice soft, and it's other soils are also used, but I think it also in that kind of a space, a pit, a contained space, is where they train, and the upper body strength is vital because largely it is about using your arms and your upper body, your chest. So the neck also, the shoulder and neck also becomes very prominent because the very rule is that you're not supposed to submit your upper back onto the floor, right? When the opponent throws you down, you have to keep yourself from giving up, from your shoulders, the upper back being on the floor. So obviously you will work with a lot of, you can keep your head on the floor though, which is why the neck strength then becomes very important. The shoulder strength becomes important. The upper back strength, the chest and the arms becomes very important in such a wrestling thing. And so they had their own set of practices to strengthen the upper body. And if you look at now Surya Namaskar, where we go down on the floor, plank, chaturanga, astanga, urdhva mukha, adho mukha, like in the astanga style, or in the what we in Shivananda, Satyananda style, we call that dandasana, Ashtanga Namaskara, Bhujanga, Parvata. That is what these mallas train. That bit is what they do, probably hundreds, 150s, 200s in a training morning. When they start off the training, they do this. Of course, they use it as a warm-up and also strengthening their upper body. And that bit is very consistent. Any type of Surya Namaskara you take, it is a consistent bit. Of course, there are other postures added to this. But this one, Danda, it's called. And various forms of Dandas are available. If you look at Kusti and if you look at wrestling, Malapurana also talks about quite a bit of this. There is different forms of Dandas. And one very common one is that we just talked about, Chaturanga Dandasana. The word Danda also appears there. Chaturanga Dandasana, and then you do Urdhva Mukha, Adho Mukha. Chaturanga Dandasana, Urdhva Mukha, Adho Mukha. And that is consistent. It is consistent in Surya Namaskara as we do it today. It is consistent in the vinyasas that we do today. So that probably is the core of the practice, and everything else was kind of built around it. Sure, you could also end, you could start and end from the standing position, or you could just take the plank itself as a starting position, end at plank, and keep repeating. Mm-hmm. And the jumpings and the lunges, all of that became part of, this whole exercise. And obviously for the mallas, it was important they build their upper body strength. And we could also connect this to a lot of the other asanas that we have in the modern day, especially the inversions. Mallas, for them, the upper body strength is important. So obviously inversions is how they build that strength also. And so a lot of the inversions, apart from the one that I mentioned, headstand and other things, where it was more austerity practices. But some of these modern day inversions that we have is also what a malla would ideally work on, and which is what probably you could see when you look at these. So here are different forms of dandas. They could do it in how you do chaturanga, urdhva mukha, adho mukha. There could be different ways of doing this, and that's what you would see here. And I think that could have been, because this is ancient. Right? This is ancient as Ramayana, Mahabharata, and maybe much older, right? And that seems to be interesting, especially when, there's also a little bit of modern day history where the Europeans started coming to India for various reasons. And then there is this, at a time where physical power was important, because there's quite a bit of battles going on, physical warfare going on, and then a certain culture of physical fitness was required and probably as modified. So we already had this. The Mallas, that group practice, but not the general mass. And so probably the others picked it up, the ones that would train the army, the martial training. They must have picked a wonderful way to train the upper body for soldiers, and so they must have come in. Of course, there are other documentation theories about how Shivaji Maharaj included this in his army training, and of course, then it's been very popular in Maharashtra region, they say, and that's how probably it has come. And also for us when India was the fight against the English and the fight for independence began, and obviously there was a certain need for nationalism and to have our own practices, to have our own kind of training to even get the English out of India. And so probably this became a kind of a practice that was recommended. Whether it was practiced en masse, we don't know. I think armies, certain groups of armies might have practiced. And so for physical training also this became popular. And as a common man, I think bringing this in to our own everyday practice for physical health also started to become popular. This is where the whole shift of yoga for health began. Probably we could put it to about 100 years back when all of this started. And I think we can talk about that on a different podcast. But I think that's also very interesting, how the shift from the ancient intent and how that moved to the modern day popular yoga for health is also very interesting. But because in present day we use it for health. And so those are a few of the slides. Any questions based on these slides? I could take it up and then I'll stop sharing.
No, I've never heard this approach of the Dandas. So it's very fascinating for me because I always thought, especially looking back at classical Surya Namaskar, I always thought it was about the spine and moving it through flexion and extension. And it was mainly for that. And it was also, it had the mantras and, it was a full meditative practice. So I think my understanding of it is a little more in fragments. So this was very helpful. So I have two questions for you. One is an observation, one's a question. One is you were talking about upper back, neck strength, because they couldn't put that back on the floor in Kusti, right? Well, I'm calling it Kusti.
Kusti.
So it also, I think of modern day with everyone with their text neck and sitting at their desks. It's a good thing we are working in this capacity, right? That is one. But so my question to you is, does it matter what type of Surya Namaskar you're doing? Because, I've learned this from you. There are different types of Surya Namaskars. Some classical schools have certain tweaks. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Satyananda does right leg first and then left leg on the way out. But
that's right.
And then classical does right. I call it classical does right and right, left and left. And then we jump into vinyasa.
That's right.
So can you help us understand classical Surya Namaskar as a physical practice, for lack of a better word, and vinyasa? And does it really matter in its details who does what?
I think it does.
Clear?
Yeah. I think it does. It does. The variations that we have is for a reason. Why do you have so many options of doing the same practice? And the same asanas have different variations, right? Different modifications or variations, you could say, adaptations, you could say. And so there is this, I think the same thing applies to Surya Namaskara. Surya Namaskara, like I say, I was sharing that has an ancient origin in some parts, but I think the way we practice it today is definitely modern. I think which is also why I use the word, was a smart inclusion It's fantastic, and I think it should have been a part of physical yoga at least. If someone practiced just physical yoga, it should have been a part. Anyway, we now have it as a part of our thing. And you also mentioned about how in the modern day we look at it as a spine.
Is that correct? I mean, I've heard it.
mobility.
I'm just repeating what I've heard.
Yeah. I think for certain movement of the spine, largely the flexion and extension, forward and the backward bend of the spine, I think it works wonderfully well. Of course, it lacks the twist and the lateral movements and all of that. I think that needs to be added to make it complete. But I think the most important one is the forward and backward move. That's a more common one, I would say. Backward, we don't do as much, and which is why that's required. And forward, we anyway do while we are seated right now, or what other things that we do. We are kind of flexing at the hip, flexing the spine, and that's a very common one. So I think getting the alignment right. Those were all smart inclusions or changes that must have happened to the Malla Dandas, right? These Dandas were simply physical, you could say. Of course, they were coordinated with the breath, but physical. And the purpose was very simple: strengthen the upper body. But then for us now, when we use it in yoga, we are looking at how we could make it more conscious in the moment. So breath comes in at every step of it, and very nicely coordinated breath in and out. And so there is this part where we also hold the breath, and so all kinds of breath training also is already started when you do Surya Namaskar. And the relevance of Surya Namaskar, or this type of practice, flow practice, is very much needed for the kind of people that we are today. Our minds are not stable, our minds are not still. So something moving keeps our mind occupied.
And our bodies are sedentary, so it's the opposite.
Yeah, also. So I think that works both ways. So you are creating activity. More importantly, even if you look at the classical view, what are you doing with the mind when you move your body in a certain rhythm, back and forth, and multiple rounds continuously? You are keeping your mind occupied. Now, the second aspect to this is now then is our who's it suited for, who should do it, and how much should we do it. I think it depends on the physical ability of the person. Youngsters could train with a lot more of, could take on a lot more impact on their bodies and joints, younger bodies. And so I think even if you look at these mallas, they start when they're very young, little kids, and they peak when they're about 25, 30 years old. And so after that, they slow down. So which means these kinds of exercises and impacts can be taken at a certain age. And so same goes with the yoga also. Yeah. So the kind of impacts that you will have on your joints, especially on your knees and ankles, as you do the repetitive is one thing, back to back many rounds. And the other thing is the jumping part of it, where you throw the body weight onto the front and back. Of course, you're controlling it with the core, but then there is initially, when the training period, there's quite a bit of impact on these lower body joints. And so who should do it? Probably someone younger, better suited, but then someone older, the Vata phase of life, the later half of life, and then the joints are not so great. The lubrication is not so good as it used to be when we were younger, even for a Vata person. So I think such jumpings would definitely be avoided. Then obviously a walk to the front or a step back very gently is still a good option, which means that there is option for everybody. And so I think we need to pick based on, one is our abilities, age, and I think the region that we live in on practice, the geographical region also makes some sense. In some places it's good to, you need to warm up your body. You need to do a little more intense physical practice than probably in places where you may not have to do such intense practice, a gentle. And also, I think this will also be applicable to winter practice versus summer and rainy season. And so I think the same. Rainy and summer, you slow it down. Winter, you go all out.
So a couple of things are popping up in my head as you're speaking about this. One is, I completely understand. You're saying depends on who the person is. It's while we do a lot of generalization in modern asana practice, you still take all of these nuances into account. So what about, I have two questions for you. One is, how many rounds is recommended a day? Because I've heard some numbers being thrown around that you should do X number of Surya Namaskars a day for general health. And then there is the what I call gold standard of 108 Surya Namaskars. And at least my understanding of it has been 108 classical Surya Namaskar.
Okay.
Okay. And I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but I've noticed people here do 108 of Vinyasa Surya Namaskars. It freaks me out because of my shoulders, my hamstrings. I don't think I'm built for 108 Chaturangas multiple times over. So I want you to talk to us about or clarify for us what is that bare minimum number. I know it depends on the practitioner, but assuming it's a regular asana practitioner, this the hype behind, and I'm saying hype behind 108, its significance, and what type of Surya Namaskar should we be doing? How often? Can you just, for once and for all, give us a masterclass on that 108?
I mean, I'll share what I know. And also, I want to call this out to the audience and everybody listening to this. The conversation is now moving from what is classical, what is in the textbook, to now what a yoga teacher would do with the additional information about, what is required for health and what medical science would recommend. Those bits are coming in. So these you won't find in the text. So we've now, even the previous question and this question, all of this is more of a present day yoga teacher with all the resources that we have. I'm going to answer based on all of this. Okay. Because obviously there's no mention of Surya Namaskara. Obviously there's no mention of how many rounds of Surya Namaskara you need to do in the classical text. So coming to the point, firstly, if you look at what is the objective or how are we using yoga asanas in the modern day? If I have to connect it to something in the medical science, obviously I will first look at Ayurveda. And even if you connected it to modern medical science, that's okay. We could also talk about that. But connecting it to Ayurveda, what practice is this asana practice that we're doing? What practice this equivalent to in Ayurveda? Because Ayurveda is a health science, and so obviously they're recommending certain things to do for health. And so where does this practice, physical activity or asana practice come? In Ayurveda, it's called Vyayama. I think we've heard of this word in the modern day as well as exercise. A simple translation, exercise, Vyayama. And in Ayurveda, Vyayama is one of the means of attaining and maintaining good health. One of the means. Obviously, there's a lot of others. There is the diet, there is the sleep, Ayurveda very clearly mentions all of these. Then there is something called the bodily urges, attaining to bodily urges, I think very important, Vegas. And of course, there is the detox practices, daily detox, dinacharya, ruticharya. So quite a list of practice is recommended by Ayurveda. And Ayurveda being a medical science, we can, I think we can accept that and saying that, okay, this is what needs to be done for preventive health, maintaining good health. Now, of all these practices, what stands out or what can be equated to what we're doing in the present day, even though we're using yoga asanas, is we are actually doing Vyayama of Ayurveda, right? For most of us, physical fitness, and physical fitness is connected to mental well-being as well. So that is connected. And so we're doing Vyayama. And then it becomes clear that, okay, what is Vyayama of Ayurveda recommending in terms of how many rounds and how long you should do, when you should do, what age? And I think that becomes an interesting piece of information that we can gather from the ancient texts. The Vyayama section of Ayurveda is useful in understanding what is that we need to do with the yoga asanas and how much and what is the limit. So based on that, I would say Ayurveda Vyayama recommends a certain physical activity every day as part of dinacharya. It comes under dinacharya, meaning everyday activity. Of course, there is rules and regulations, who should do it daily, who should not. And also kids shouldn't be doing it or older people shouldn't be doing it. There are all kinds of rules and regulations, do's and don'ts. But generally speaking, practice it every day. How should you practice? And you should practice. Usually, the recommended means are similar ones: the malla, the exercises that we talked about, or equestrian, swimming, archery. These are the physical activities that they did in the past. So Ayurveda just talks about this. But one very principal level information that we can gather is that it says Vyayama should be done after an empty stomach, and all those rules come from there. Because Dinacharya, if you look, you would have already gone to the toilet, you cleansed and all of that, and then you practice Vyayama. So that empty stomach is there. We can pick up that. Second part is it says you'll have to practice it until there is ayasa created. Ayasa is exertion created in the body. So this is the cardio that we talk about in the modern day, right? You get your heart working beyond its limit, push it beyond limit. So ayasa is a word used in Ayurveda. So we have to practice until ayasa is created. Ayasa would be shortness of breath, easy to identify, we are short of breath. But there's also a whole concept of ati vyayama, over-exercising, too much exercise.
Which that happens a lot too.
Yes, and one good indicator is if you're short of breath, if you're gasping for air, you cannot, easily take in the next breath. Or, of course, you're creating ayasa, physical exertion, but then the breath could be a good indicator. That's when they say, stop the practice. And the other indicators that they say is the sweat part of it. Maybe that's not, on the other part, we need to bear in mind is Ayurveda is talking about how you would use the knowledge in India. So obviously in Indian climatic condition, the sweating to a certain extent, instant in some places, but in some places, of course, it will take time. But sweat on the forehead, sweat in the chest and the armpits, they give indicators as to how long you could go with the practice. And then they say stop. And they talk about the ill effects of ati vyayama, over exercise. And so I think that bit is what will help us understand how we should be practicing yoga asanas as we do in the modern day, because no other principles in the yoga text talk about this. There's no limit. There's no mentioning, say that you do, each asana, you do it for 5 times. There's no mention of such. So obviously we cannot infer such information as long as it's passed down from the lineage, guru passing it on to the student. There's some information we can gather from there. But very academically speaking, we don't have information of this. But now that we are practicing asanas as a vyayama, then we can borrow information, do's and don'ts, principles of vyayama of Ayurveda. And so I would recommend maybe anybody interested to further read the Vyayama part of Ayurveda, and I think that'll be useful. But just to answer your question, 108, again, 108 is a very sacred number for us here in India. And the Vedic practices, rituals, all of them, cling around this 108. Of course, it has its own significance. Probably if not 108 fractions of that, quarter of it, half of it, or other fractions of 108 is also very commonly used. And so probably the need to do 108 Surya Namaskar in the context of the knowledge of Vyayama of Ayurveda is not required. It definitely get into a case of over exercising, or what do you call ati Vyayama. But Ayurveda also very clearly mentions how you would develop this ability. It's not that, say we all practice, say 5 rounds every day, and one fine day we have a challenge where we do 108. That's not the approach of Vyayama in Ayurveda. You need to develop it very slowly. So gradually, even if you
increments.
Yes, there is the body adapts. So you give time for the body to adapt. So say if you're doing 5, then you push it to 8 rounds. Do that 8 rounds for some time where the body adapts. And then you would push it to 10.
So don't shock the system in many ways.
Absolutely. That's the principle in Ayurveda, very clearly mentioned. It's not only for, for the physical practice, but it also includes for the changes that we make in life. Diet changes that we make in life, say sleeping hours that we usually, New Year, you make resolutions, you want to wake up early or whatever else. No? Any changes in our daily life there is a method to which I very clearly talked about in Ayurveda. And so asana, even increments that we do in our physical practice has to be this way. I think it's common sense to an extent, right? If you look at it,
I
can
mean,
I
you
run
would
a
think it
marathon?
would be. But I've
Yeah.
seen people who jump from beginners yoga classes into 108.
Yeah, I think that is surely to be avoided. I think that's, that, I think what is happening there is the very purpose that we all came to yoga, the very objective is being lost. Because if I've come to yoga for health, I am compromising health for the, for probably a certain identity that I gain by doing 108 Surya Namaskara. Or
it's
by
very ego-driven, right? In some
best.
way.
Yes. So we are actually, if you look at that way, then obviously if you listen to the body will tell you, which is also very interesting, the modern day exercise. We don't have a set number of practices and everybody do that. Body has its own intelligence. I mean, modern exercise, group exercise, we've been doing for a few years now.
True.
It's nothing, it's not ancient. Nobody was doing this kind of, time. Vyayama is talked about, and so there is a certain kind of, but that usually would amount to 30, 40 minutes of practice, but daily, every day. Ayasa is required. Also, why that was the case was because the lifestyle itself was pretty active.
Fair.
And that's a better way to, benefit than doing 1 hour or 90 minutes of intense practice and not doing anything for the rest of the day.
The whole day, yeah.
Is not good. Instead, you do only 30 minutes of your practice, but very active throughout the day. That's how our bodies have evolved. And that's what, benefits or is more effective. And so in the long run, if you're very interested in improving your health and want the most effective practices, listen to your body. Body has evolved its own way of, how much to do. But our minds have taken over. I read something, someone says something, and someone is listening.
Somebody else did it, and it, right?
So minds have taken over our bodies, signals. Body is definitely throwing out signals all the time.
Yes, the mind's not listening. It's I always have said this out loud sometimes, is the yogis kept it simple, and it's just common sense in so many ways. We are not used to simple solutions. We want to complicate it and then find more complicated answers for a problem that doesn't need to be that complicated.
Agree with that statement.
I want to be mindful of your time, but I want to ask you one more question here, if I may. Would you call Surya Namaskar a moving meditation?
Yeah, I mean, you could also use it as a moving meditation.
Okay.
I mean, it's not that Surya Namaskar itself is meant for that. Obviously, we are also tracing its origins. It's modern in the sense and all that. Anything can be a moving meditation. But Surya Namaskara is a kind of tailor-made for it. Kind of,
How do you mean?
I mean, because there's very beautifully incorporated breath. And breath is how you would stay grounded. If you're looking at a meditative state of mind, you cannot skip breath. You cannot be erratic with your breath. And you cannot breathe through your mouth. It has to be through the nostrils. So that element is there. And if you look at the other aspect is the space, the space that you would cover in Surya Namaskara. Surya Namaskara is the practice that covers the maximum space that the body can reach. The body, when you reach your hands up and go down, you go down all the way to the floor, and then you also stretch yourself as far back as you can. And so, in a way, spatial orientation, we are reaching out, connecting to the space around us and to the maximum. And so this itself is also a kind of awareness of the space around is essential for meditation. And this is creating that opportunity to be aware of the space, aware of bodily movement. It's rhythmic movement. It's we keep moving in and out of the practice. And so there are some of these elements that are fantastic. And that's why this is really well suited for a moving meditation. So I think there are cultures which do such practices as part of their ritual, not so much as a physical exercise. I think Buddhists do quite a bit of these kind of similar kind of prostrations, if you've seen them, and they keep doing it probably the whole day. And there are other kind of prostrations where you move from, okay, you're also moving forward in space through prostration. So I think there are some of these exist in the ritual side, religious practice side of it. And I think it's also prepares your mind, trains your mind to be ready when you're actually at the end of that ritual, or when you're opening up, when you're surrendering as part of the religious practice. But in yoga, as you asked about meditation part, I think it opens up really well for meditation. It's a well-suited practice for a moving meditation. You could slow down, you could, yet be very grounded and look at the rhythm of the whole breath and the movement in the body, the circulation in the body. And so a lot of things happening, but it gets to a point where it becomes consistent and rhythmic. Right, a lot of stimulus, but then it can also become very consistent, and that could be a nice inward going practice.
Wonderful. I feel like I have so many more questions for you, but I will save them for another time.
Definitely, I think we should anytime if we can find a common time. I think let's do more in the sense what is required. I mean, what is useful, and let's do that.
I'm going to
very glad.
I am so happy to hear that, because once you have given me the green signal, which you just did, I will keep circling back. I hope to have you more on the podcast, and I hope we can have. I want the listeners to be exposed to your wealth of knowledge and experience that you have. I know you're very humble and quiet about it, but you've made a tremendous impact, not only on my yoga journey and life in general, but all the other teachers. So I am so glad you are here. Thank you for your time. I will link to everything where people can connect with you on our show notes. But thank you so much for being here. This was wonderful.
Thanks, Arundhati. Thanks for inviting and this conversation. Also, I mean, I look for opportunities to learn more. In your case, I think this need not be just one way that I'm sharing, but I think I would also like to hear from you. You teaching in North America, and obviously, as you teach different set of people, there's a certain insight that comes to you, and all of that is, I think, required as we walk on this path and understand what is more efficient. And so, I think sometime I would like to hear from you as well. And,
anytime.
Like to listen to what's happening and what's been your experience and insights that you've drawn from teaching in North America.
I will share that with you sometime. I'm just somebody who ended up being at the right place at the right time. And I think people around me are very generous, and they put up with a lot of my little yoga that I know really kindly. So it's been a journey. I will tell you all of that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear.
I would love
Thanks,
to. But thank you so much for being here. And I hope that we as the Let's Talk Yoga podcast community get to hear more from you.
I hope so too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you for listening. I hope you found that valuable. As always, everything is linked at letstalk.yoga/listen. If you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to leave us a review and a rating. It always helps to get this podcast into the hands or ears of other yoga teachers and students. I will see you next week with a brand new episode. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.